Support and resistance. Trend line types. Bollinger Bands, BBs. Bollinger Bands, BBs, are essentially an SMA in the shape of a channel rather than a single line. Because they combine the traits of both channels and simple moving averages, SMAs, they tell us about both support and resistance and momentum. We'll focus here on their use as support and resistance. Typical BBs are built by plotting a 20-period SMA, purple, then plotting a band of specified units of standard deviation, a statistical measure of deviation around that SMA, thus forming a kind of channel, as shown in this chart. The default settings of BBs are usually 20-2. You can tinker with them as you like, and later we'll discuss one very useful variation when we introduce ways to use BBs as momentum indicators. What are the advantages of BBs over channels? 1. Better for anticipating the crowd's moves. Like momentum averages, they're plotted by an objective calculation, so everyone viewing BBs with the same settings is seeing the exact same support and resistance from those BBs. That's one reason why it's worth watching BBs with these standard settings, because they're so widely used, and thus tell you what the herd is seeing as potential support and resistance, and entry-exit points when they view BBs. 2. Tells us about momentum. The width of the BB channels tracks price volatility. In other words, when price is making a series of big moves, the width of the BB channels widens. When price movements are small, the channel narrows. That means that when price is continually testing either one of the upper or lower bands, or breaks past one of them, momentum is very strong. This brings us to an important limitation of BBs as support and resistance. BBs are meaningful support and resistance only in range-bound markets. Note in this chart how often the BBs serve as support and resistance points. Part of the reason is that the two standard deviation distances from the central SMA, meaning a 4 standard deviation wide channel, are wide enough to ensure that there's a 95% chance of prices staying within it, based on the number of prior periods covered by the SMA that's located in the center of the channel. As noted before, BBs stretch like rubber bands to contain most price movements. That's because BBs track a moving average, so they move up and down with trends. Maintain a 4 standard deviation channel, 2 above and 2 below the 20-period SMA in the center. That means the statistical probability at any one moment of the price touching or breaching the bands is only about 5%. However, like any statistical measure, it assumes that all elements of the sample, in this case the prices and the 20 periods, are equally probable. That assumption works for flat, range-bound markets or gently trending markets, which by definition are periods during which the market's perception of a currency pair's value remains unchanged. Under these conditions, the price tends to fluctuate between the upper and lower bands, as it bounces off the upper and lower bands like a ball bouncing between the floor and ceiling, as shown in this chart. That's a classic range-bound chart, as highlighted by the horizontal blue channel lines. Notice how, despite all the gyrations, price is essentially unchanged over the period the chart covers. However, this assumption doesn't apply during a strong trend, which by definition indicates that market perceptions about value are changing quickly. The prices of the prior 20 periods are not equally probable. Indeed, much higher or lower prices suddenly become far more likely. Like any other moving average, BBs, which are just an SMA in the shape of a channel, lag behind price, and the gap widens when trends are strong. Let's look at an example. Note in this chart how price continued to climb along the upper band from April to mid-June 2010, September to October 2010, February to April 2011, and July 2011. All periods highlighted. In other words, the Bollinger Bands often didn't provide useful resistance for the strong uptrend as price repeatedly climbed up the outer bands for extended periods.